Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Western Spirit. Today, we have a very special guest, Bethany Mandel. She's an American journalist and author of her latest book with Carol Markowitz, which is called uh, where is it? Here.
Stolen youth.
Stolen Youth, How Radicals Are in Erasing
Erasing
Innocence
innocence.
and Indoctrinating a Generation. And so, Bethany, sorry about getting the name wrong. I was reading it. It's tough.
I get
tough
it
for me to
wrong
read.
sometimes too. So you got me started on the subtitle, and then I could finish it. How radicals are, and then once someone says those first three words, I can do the rest.
Very good. So we got it right together. Bethany, I want to ask you, we're talking on Thanksgiving. We're recording this on Thanksgiving. That's a unique American holiday. I think it's a national holiday. It's not a religious holiday. So maybe just reflecting on what we've seen in the last month or so in America, just give us your take about the election, about what's happening now. How have you processed everything?
So, I mean, I'm happy with the election results. I could not have asked for better. It's been a pretty wild month. I mean, really, honestly, since the summer, the day that President Trump was almost assassinated, it has felt like we're living in this like sliding windows, sliding doors world where things really could have gone one way or the other. I was listening earlier today to Mark Anderson on Joe Rogan, and he said the same. And he put to voice something that I had been thinking also, that that assassination attempt and then the election was really a sliding doors moment of like, where is America going to go? Where's the world going to go? Um, and I'm just very grateful that we live in this reality where President Trump turned his head. I believe it was an act of God and nothing else. Like, if you watch slow motion of that moment where he just cocks his head in this weird way right at that perfect moment, that was God. I don't think that God, ordained President Trump to win, but I mean, I'm grateful. Grateful that he did. I
Yeah.
think that most Israelis are as well. And I saw a turn among American Jews who, I mean, there's a lot of talk about, the Jewish vote, and it's hard to talk about because, two Jews, three opinions. But among the more committed Jews that I know, who vote on their Judaism and vote on Israel, I saw numbers for President Trump like I've never seen before. Um, New Jersey was within 4 points, which is mind blowing to me. It's become
Yes.
basically a purple state. And if you look at the neighborhoods where there are enclaves of modern Orthodox Jews, I'm not even talking about Lakewood. I'm talking about like Passaic or Teaneck or, any of those, Tenafly, those went red in a really surprising way. So I think that this was a real turning point for American Jews this past election season for sure.
And also, one thing that we've heard a lot over the past since the election is the question if woke is dead. So a lot of people that we spoke about this with Coleman Hughes, where the strongest Trump ad, according to the New York Times, they had like, I guess, a spoke with people in the campaign, was the ad that said "She is for they them, Trump is for you." And the basic notion was that most Americans had enough of this whole pronoun thing, had enough of the whole, identity politics in all of its forms. And on the other hand, I saw, like 2 days after, people in the New York Times columnist, for example, wrote, we need to go stronger on identity politics. We need to double down. Because Trump was doubling down on white identity politics, which is very weird because he got larger percentages of minority votes than I think Republicans ever got, pretty much. Where do you see this whole thing going?
I mean, wokeness was never popular. Carol and I talked about that in Stolen Youth. It is a minority view for sure. Um, but the problem with it is its sticking power and its influence. And this was something that we talked about a lot in Stolen Youth, that, this unpopular ideology was dominating schools, media, entertainment, and that hasn't changed. Um, we are seeing sort of an interesting shift, I think, corporately. there was an interesting story that Walmart had decided to roll back, and I'm planning on writing about this next week. Um, Walmart has decided to roll back a lot of their DEI, a lot of their diversity, equity, and inclusion, all of that
Yeah.
wokeness, basically. And there are successes on that front, but those successes are at the hands of very committed activists. Walmart, I know that there's people internally that have been fighting it, but also externally, there's been pressure put on by people like Robbie Starbuck, and Chris Rufo has been incredible
Yeah.
on this front. And if DEI dies, it will be at the hands of Chris Rufo. So wokeness is less popular, and I think that the Democratic elites are starting to realize that it's a liability. But if you see, for example, Congressman Seth Moulton in Massachusetts, he said this and has one of my favorite really tone deaf moments was he said this and then some of his constituents protested him in Salem, Massachusetts. And so I was like, it's the modern day witch
But
trials.
let's just say what he said, which is he said that my daughter shouldn't be worried about
Hmm.
playing against men in her sports league
Yeah,
in school, and he said, but I'm as Democrat, I'm supposed to be scared to say this, and like right on cue, his chief of staff resigned, and there's protests outside his offices in Salem, which is it's a very interesting place to protest.
they're not very they're very tone deaf. They're not very self-aware. But I mean
This episode is brought to you by Globius, the go-to agency for scaling brands on Amazon, Etsy, eBay, and more. Are you running a brand and wondering how to take things to the next level? Whether you're already selling on Amazon or thinking about it, Globius has an amazing offer for our listeners. They're giving away a free market research and action plan to help you understand your market, analyze your competition, and uncover growth opportunities. Here's how it works. Hop on a quick call with the Globius team and they'll do all the heavy lifting from analyzing your category to crafting a custom roadmap for your success. No catch, no commitment, just actionable insights tailored to your brand. To grab this offer, visit globius.io/podcast or click the link in the show notes. Don't miss the chance to get expert advice and a clear path to grow your brand. Now let's get back to the show.
this is a battle that I think that the left is going to have to fight within itself, is that they have to face the fact that this is a losing ideology. And the they them ad, I watched it last night actually, rewatched it just to keep my mind fresh. And the thing that they really hit was the state funding of sex
Yes.
changes for prisoners, and I think members of the military, but I definitely remember the prisoners. And so it's it's not this idea that like we as conservatives or we as Republicans care what people are doing to their bodies. I don't really necessarily. I think it's
Mhm.
a bad idea, but to each your own if you're a legal adult. But the problem is they're really inflicting it upon us as taxpayers, but also inflicting it on children, and that's really where I think the vast majority of Americans draw the line.
Right, and I do think that we also have to talk about just if we're already talking about the presidential election. I'll get off of that in a second, but one thing that I did see is the campaign of Kamala. Her people are starting to talk.
Yeah.
It takes them usually a little bit longer, but I think they couldn't hold it in, some of them, because of all the behind the scenes garbage being thrown. So they, I guess, feel they have to get out in front of it, and the excuses are like pretty unbelievable. I saw you tweeted about it, also retweeted some stuff that her campaign manager was on some podcast and they asked her why she didn't go to Joe Rogan's show, and she said because they didn't have time, but they did have time to do the Beyonce concert, and which was right next to Joe Rogan, also in Texas. And then it also turns out that they've given money to all these celebrities, like millions of dollars, 2 million to Oprah, 500,000 to Al Sharpton, who interviews her a week later, and all this kind. And they make $1 billion in like a very short time, and then they end up in debt. And their staffers are doing GoFundMe to pay for their salaries. The whole I don't understand what's happening.
Yeah, it's pretty embarrassing. I mean, I think I think it's part of why people are throwing her under the bus so much, because they're like, you didn't even pay me through Thanksgiving. All bets are off. But I mean, ultimately, I do feel something resembling sympathy for her staff, because she was not a good candidate. Like,
Mhm.
I don't know how they were going to win. There was the Joe Rogan thing, but a lot of folks have said, she was afraid of her staffers, that she didn't want to go on because they would revolt, whatever. And I think the reality was they were afraid of putting her in front of Joe Rogan because she's not good. She's not smart, she's not likable, and they knew that. They all knew that. And so they didn't want to open themselves up to a mountain of bad press after
Right.
3 hours of her saying God knows what. And what I found really fascinating, I didn't watch all the interviews. I didn't watch all 6 hours of Trump and Vance on Rogan, but I was really struck, and I think the majority of American voters who watched were struck by how normal they were. Um, JD Vance is a total nice guy. Like, he was hilarious. And this is something that I think most people that don't work in political commentary on a forward facing way don't necessarily appreciate. But learning how to kibitz like that is a skill. And it's one that it's taken me 15 years, and I still don't speak completely fluidly and perfectly, and I still do like too much. He was able to talk about policy and nerdy, wonky things, and then immediately sort of just dive into, yeah, that's like, this is funny, and I like this show. And he could flow like that in a way I have never seen anyone be able to do. And people watching that, first of all, took that both Trump and Vance are likable human beings,
Yeah.
but also that the media has been lying to them. Like, they're not these like monsters that the media has spent the last several years telling us they are. And so I think it was a real red pill moment for a lot of people who watched it and thought, like, I could, they could be president. That's cool. They seem nice.
And
And
also,
also, like,
Bethany, I want to just stop you there. Just to the Waltz, his whole reason why I think why she picked him was that he said that Vance wasn't normal,
weird.
was
Yeah.
weird.
That it was weird. Yeah.
And then it turned out that Waltz was very weird in the way
Yeah.
he moved his hands and in the way he spoke and in the way he was just
Yeah.
a weird, eccentric person. And Vance goes on, like you said, Joe Rogan and all these other podcasts, and he comes out very just normal.
Hmm.
So it was
Yeah.
like a double, yeah,
Yeah. I mean, and something else that I was really struck by, when when they sort of decided to go with Waltz being the normie and Vance being weird, is that that was another instance where Democrats told us, like, they peed on our leg and told us it wasn't raining. They spent, a year and a half telling us that Biden was fine. They
right.
told us that Waltz was normal and Vance was weird. And now we're sort of seeing this video that came out of Kamala speaking to the camera post election, where she's intoxicated.
Yeah, and she also hiccups in middle
Yeah.
of the,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so I watched that video as half Irish Catholic, and I saw it clear as day. But the entire election, I saw a lot of right wing chatter about a drinking problem of hers, and I didn't really pay that much attention to it. There's chatter about a lot of things. Most of it is true, it turns out. But I don't know. I didn't really pay much attention to it. And now, post election, I'm sort of kicking myself because this was just yet another instance where they were peeing on our leg and telling us it wasn't raining. And Democrats, I think, released that ad, and or her staff allowed that ad to go out because they're mad at her. But it really created a trust deficit with Democrats, because yet again, they're just bold-faced lying to the American people about something really significant. If she does have a drinking problem, that's something the American people need to know. And that was disqualifying. And all of the people around her didn't care, just like all the people around President Biden don't care that he's a couple, to quote my mother, he's a couple fries short of a Happy Meal.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I also say that even if she doesn't have a drinking problem, if that's the way she's processing her words and slurring them and hiccuping in the middle of informal videos that she's putting out to the public, something's wrong either way. So it's like, okay, you're not drinking. Maybe she isn't. I don't know. Maybe she is. Doesn't matter. It's very, very weird that they let that video come out the way it is,
Mhm.
that she approved it. And if she didn't approve it, someone's stabbing her in the back, metaphorically. It's very, very weird. Um, I just want to turn to the Jewish community because about the elections. And one of the things that we kept on hearing in Israel during the election was the disconnect between American Jews and Israeli Jews, meaning we had polls in Israel, 80-90% of Jews in Israel supported Donald Trump, left, right. Almost all the Jews in Israel supported him. I assume that they supported him 100% because of the perception, the true perception that he would support Israel more. We're not, most Israelis don't really understand what's happening internally in America. But on the other hand, a lot of Americans, most American Jews, it seems to me, still vote Democrat. And I wondered if you could maybe give us the inside look about the American Jewish community, the way you see it. Where are where is the American Jewish community politically? Are they? It seems to be a lot of progressive Jews in America since October 7th are in shock. Their friends, their natural allies in the intersectional community, basically stabbed them in the back. You
Yes.
had people. I have friends in America who are liberal liberal progressives who can't understand to this day what happened.
Yeah, I was talking to a couple folks, American Israelis, mostly, Israelis who have American passports, I should say, and who have the ability to vote. And I was just looking through my messages from the middle of October, and a friend who's quite liberal said to me, off the record, I had tweeted, at shul yesterday, someone told me, as an American, I don't see how you vote for Trump, and as a Jew, I don't see how you vote for Kamala. That was how I think a lot of American Jews felt. But she sent me that tweet, and she said, I'm currently sitting in a bunker and thinking to myself, I don't know how I vote for her. This is just life and death. And I think that that's the difference for American Israelis who are living in Israel, is that it was just a question of life and death. Like, there is no, what about this, or what like, you can't make a cerebral choice about a binary option when you're in a bunker. Like, it's it's either you live or you die. And American Israelis understood that their best chance at safety and getting the weapons they need, getting the support that they need, all of those things were President Trump. Um, we in America have the luxury of being more cerebral, and I wish that weren't the case. I wish that uh, we voted more about the safety of our brothers and sisters in Israel. Um, to me, it was a very clear choice that that was what needed to happen, and but also, I mean, I don't understand. I don't understand anyone, especially a Jew, who thought that voting for Kamala made sense. Um, you don't like Trump. I mean, I don't care. I just I it's for a lot of liberal Jews, many of whom are not religiously observant. Abortion is like a religion. Democrat, like, 15, 20 years ago, I spent a Rosh Hashanah in Singapore, and I went to the Reform service in Singapore because I wasn't Orthodox then. And the rabbi gave a sermon on the Bima, comparing, and I'm not kidding, comparing Barack Obama to Jesus on the Bima on Rosh Hashanah. Maybe it was Yom Kippur, but I think
What
it was.
what do both of them have to do with Rosh Hashanah in a synagogue?
Yeah, it was weird. It was weird. So I mean, there's a reason why I'm not Reform anymore. It didn't feel anything resembling authentic. Um, and if you get the, emails from the Religious Action, whatever, the PAC for the Reform movement, it's all progressive politics. And
Hmm.
a lot of them have had a come to Jesus moment over the course of the last year, because they've realized that, like, their woke buddies don't have their backs, and turns out they're all anti-Semites. And it's been a struggle for a lot of those people. Welcome to the party. We've been here, like the rest of us have been here a while. So I mean, if you look, we were talking about it earlier, but if you look at the votes in New Jersey, in Jewish enclaves, especially like if you look at Lakewood or like Midwood in Brooklyn, like it was deep red.
Those
I have
are
a friend.
Orthodox Jews.
Yeah, exactly. I have a friend, Ellie Steinberg, who he broke down the precincts in Lakewood where like the Frum Jews were living, and it went 98% Trump.
Yeah.
But then there's, the bagels and lox Jews who like break their Yom Kippur fast at 2 p.m. on shrimp cocktail. They voted for Kamala.
So what you're saying is, if I can maybe be a little bit blunt, is that Jews whose Jewish identity is not really in particularly Jewish, because if being Jewish is progressive politics, in other words, I could also be a Christian or I could be secular atheist with progressive politics. There's nothing particular about it, about its Judaism. So those people were much more inclined to vote for the candidate who was less, I don't know, more on abortion and more on
Hmm.
progressive politics, but people who cared more about their identity as Jews and their community were more aligned with Trump in their voting patterns.
Yeah. Yeah, basically, yes. I just, especially when it came to like the Iran leak that happened in the middle of October, and the fact that, I heard from so many hostage families, American and non-American, that they felt like their best chance. They like Biden was nice. The Biden administration was nice. I got that from every single hostage family I spoke to. Everyone in the Biden administration was nice. They don't want someone nice. They want someone who will go in and bull in a china shop, Reagan style, say, "Give me back the hostages or I will turn Gaza into glass." That's what we need. We need someone who will say that. And that's not what Hamas has heard for the last 419 days that Americans have been trapped in the tunnels of Gaza. I mean, Hirsch Goldberg Poland, his parents spoke at the DNC, and a week later they assassinated him. That doesn't happen with Trump in the White House. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Um, Also about American Jews, do you think one of the things that we keep on hearing in the Israeli media, I would say the more center left leaning media, is that Netanyahu himself is so toxic that he himself turned off a lot of America, including left wing American Jews, but in general, a lot of Americans on the left, and made Israel a partisan issue where it wasn't in the past? How much is there any truth to that, in your opinion?
No. I see Netanyahu as sort of a miniature version of Trump in the way that they catastrophize him. But Netanyahu was just doing what needed to be done. And no one on the left would have liked an Israeli prime minister who did what needed to be done. Um, there were decisions that needed to be made that were very deeply unpopular, like going into Rafah. And what I'm mad about going into Rafah was that he waited. That's
Right.
what I'm mad about. That was the biggest mistake of the war, was that he cared too much what the world thought. He should have just gone in guns blazing into Rafah.
Especially if you went in anyway at the end. So why not do it?
Exactly.
Why not like rip the band-aid off,
Hmm.
so to speak?
Yeah.
Yeah, and one thing that we do have to say is that in Israel, a lot of the criticism on Netanyahu is the opposite. Is not that he's too strong. It's that he's too weak. It's that
Hmm.
he's not doing the things faster. Is that he's
Yeah.
putting, succumbing to pressure on different things in terms of humanitarian aid, in terms of going into places where it took a long time to go in, and now we in certain places where maybe firepower was limited because they were too worried about casualties on the civilian side, so soldiers were put in dangerous situations. So stuff like that. So it's the disconnect between what the American administration was saying and what the Israeli public was saying is very stark in that
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
thank God, honestly, that the Americans will now have a president who will not give an inch. Like Mike Huckabee sounds more like a, Zionist than 85% of American Jews. He won't call it the West Bank.
Right.
Judeans, maybe.
He
I
wants
don't
to.
even say that. I say
Yeah.
the West Bank. Maybe I shouldn't. But Mike Huckabee is better than I am.
He wanted to buy a few years back. He came here and wanted to buy a house in Efrat. I remember an interview with him here. So, lucky he
Maybe
didn't buy the
close.
house, and he's still an American citizen, so he could be the ambassador here. So, one thing that maybe it has to do with your book, and I'm gonna ask you about it later, but is that it seems to me that in America, one of the big problems with the younger generation is that there's no purpose in life. So we kept on seeing a lot of these college campuses, these huge protests. And I kept on asking a lot of my guests and just reading about it, is that it seemed to me that there was two camps in the protests. One is the Muslims, student associations, these people who, first of all, a lot of them are not Americans. They're foreign exchange students who come, which I don't understand just in general, how you're letting in hundreds of thousands of students from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and all these other places, and taking billions of millions of dollars from terror regimes, basically. But then there's the other group, which is the white, progressive, woke people with, like, I remember there's in Colombia, there was the woman that said that they needed humanitarian aid,
Yeah.
and behind her there was a man in a midriff where his belly button was showing. And it's
Hmm.
like, really, you would do great in Gaza. So there was these two types of people, and the second type, it seemed to me, they're very sad people. No one was smiling. I mean, I'm from afar, sort of doing a psychological
No, but you're
analysis,
correct.
but I think they're very sad. They're very depressed. They have no aims in life. They come to college. They they have no purpose, and then someone comes with a purpose. There's a
Hmm.
genocide,
Hmm.
and they know nothing about it, and they go and they give their whole life to, because suddenly they have a purpose, and they make encampments, and they hate Jews suddenly, and they hate Israel, and they love the Palestinians, and they love Hamas. They know nothing about it, and I think it comes from a crisis of, and we see this also in the polls, people are going less and less to church, and they have no support structure around them. Where do you think America is going if this is the, first of all, do you agree that that's the problem, or
Yeah.
a large portion of it? And second of all, where do you think we're going from there?
Yeah, no, I absolutely think that's the problem. I mean, these folks really need Jesus. Say that as a Jew. No, but they really need Jesus. They really need a sense of purpose, and um, you know, we're we've taken everything out of the American childhood. It reminds me of yogurt in a weird way,
Yes.
American yogurt. Um, we take out all of the natural flavorings, all of the fruits, all of the vegetables, all of the fat, and we're replacing here all of that with sugar and artificial flavorings and food coloring, and it's driving people crazy and making them fat. That's what we're doing to the American child. We are yogurtizing their lives. We're taking out everything good and replacing it with everything bad. And it's led to mental health crisis, the likes of which we've never seen. Abigail Schreier, who's a brilliant
She was on our
from,
podcast too.
yeah,
Yeah.
brilliant from Jew from the West Coast, and her book Therapy. Basically, the entire premise of her book is we have therapized an entire generation more than we've ever, and we're getting worse and worse results. We have kids who are more anxious, more depressed, having more issues, and you start maybe to realize that the medicine maybe isn't working and maybe it's actually harming. Um, this generation of kids, I was just spent an exorbitant amount of time in an airport this week, and my daughter made friends. My 11-year-old daughter made friends with a girl her age in the airport, who had a cell phone and a watch, like an Apple Watch that was connected to her cell phone. And and she told my daughter she had ADHD, and I was like, maybe she just has a cell phone. Maybe that's the problem. Um, but this girl could not, like, my daughter was like, let's go here, let's do this, like, let's explore the airport. Like, my daughter had a sense of like adventure and excitement that this girl just did not have. And a lot of it was because, she's been shoved in front of a screen, not read good books, not heard good stories. And her parents have outsourced every aspect of her being to outside parties, whether they are an iPhone or an iPad or a TV or their school. Like, and lo and behold, their kid is not doing great. And they've got her
Yeah.
medicated out the wazoo. And maybe she shouldn't be.
But why is that? Like, I'm looking in Israel, for example. I'm just gonna. It's two totally different situations, but in Israel, people have cell phones and the kids have cell phones, and but on the other hand, the families are big, even the secular families.
Hmm.
There's a sort of, I think, and I'm not idealizing Israel, that we have a lot of problems here, but there is a sort of common purpose between families. We know people know why they're here. People
Hmm.
know what there's like a common. You're walking in the street, you don't know people, but you know you have something in common
You can
with
hand
them.
your baby to someone on the bus.
Well, I wouldn't do that, but maybe you would.
You
No, but
could.
my point, but yeah, your point is well taken, that there is a sort of common trust between people, and but I think more than that, there's a common goal. People know why they're here, what they're doing on Earth. And I think in America, it's a little bit sort of people have, there's nothing to live for for a lot of
Mhm.
people. They're living for their phone. Their phone,
Yeah.
they're not using their phone to live. They're living for their phone. I don't know if I'm making sense. I was just
No,
thinking about it as I was saying.
you're absolutely making sense. I mean, it's a real lack of direction. And I think a lot of it is Judaism. We prioritize stories.
Mhm.
We have, this from Ecclesiastes where it's like these very like deep crisis of like, why am I here? What is my like we read that, we have this like shared bedrock foundation between all of us. And we have these difficult conversations. And but also in Israel, you have like after school programs that are much more in person. You have Shabbos where a lot of people turn their phones off, even if they're not observant. Like there is a sense of like rest on
But there
Shabbos,
used
even
to
if
be
you're not.
church in America. Every Sunday, people would wake up, they would go to church, they would hang out, they would have barbecues together. It seems to me for a lot of people, they don't have that anymore. And
Yeah.
that's with the phones or without the phones, it's gone. And
Yeah.
I think,
And COVID really did a number on that in America. A lot of people lost. I mean, there was this ad for Dunkin' when I was on the plane for 4 hours and I was just staring at the screen for 4 hours. They call it raw dogging, but I just was holding a sleeping baby. Um, but I was looking at this ad and it was 2 weeks free of Dunkin' Donuts if you download the app. And I thought to myself, that's brilliant, because if you can get someone to do the same thing every single day for 2 weeks, you're setting and ingraining a pattern that will become, that will carry on. COVID, we had that for 18 months. People stayed inside, people shifted, their grocery shopping online. They shifted everything online. Meetings became online. Instead of having a lunch date, you had a Zoom meeting, which I would like want to kill myself. But this is the result of that. Tim Carney, a good friend of ours, like ours, I'm talking about me and my husband. Our families are good friends. He's a senior fellow at AEI, and he writes about this all the time. This like collapse of community and what that means. He opened his last book with a story about their youngest daughter had RSV and was hospitalized for 2 weeks. And they're a very religious Catholic family. They have 6 children also. And their church and not just their church, but like the school communities, everyone just jumped in. And not only meals were cooked, but like carpools were done. Like everything was just organized around them so that they could focus on their daughter who was hospitalized. And most 95% of Americans don't have that
yeah.
community. We don't.
Yeah, it's very sad. They used to, which is
Yeah.
like you talk about people in the 60s and 50s and even 70s and 80s. There was a sense of community. People would go outside together to play in the
Hmm.
the yard. My dad tells me like he grew up in the 50s, 60s. He has friends. Most of his friends today were people he met playing sports in the
Yeah.
yard under the building where they lived in Brooklyn. So I don't think a lot of people have that today, and it's just you see it in these protests. That's my point. That you
Yeah.
see it.
They have that community.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it's instead of using the community for a good thing, bad actors are able to use this very plight that young people find themselves in, and use it to promote a very bad thing that will hurt America in the future too, I think. And
Yeah.
one thing that I do want to ask you is that people are because there's no community, people are turning to authority figures in school, for
Hmm.
example. And a lot of the things that we've been seeing over the past few years coming out of the schools in America are very scary.
Hmm.
The teachers, why are there so many crazy teachers in America? I mean, you see the libs of TikTok with all her videos from the
Yeah.
past number of
Yeah.
years, and there's stories every day, another story happens. And what is happening, you think, with Americans' public school system?
I mean, I think that the stuff that you see on Libs of TikTok is outliers.
Right.
Um, but it's a real phenomenon. There's an entire generation. I mean, ultimately, we crave family, we crave connection. And I was a teacher. I was a teacher, I don't know, 15 years ago in rural Cambodia.
Wow.
And I realized that year that I wanted to have children. I didn't think I wanted to have children before. And I also started dating my husband that year. So they coincided and, we're
Yeah.
not unrelated. But I realized I had this maternal instinct that I wasn't aware of until then. And that year I decided I wanted to have kids, and I, met a guy I wanted to do that with. But for these folks, like, they have that too. We all have that, instinct of wanting that. But for many reasons, these people are not dating, and they're not getting married, and they're not having their own children. And so they've decided that the children that belong to other people belong to them, and they're going to get out, all the political, everything that because they don't see it as politics. They see it as morality. They see it
Right.
as, like, I'm just teaching you how to be a good person. And that's what a lot of the SEL, social emotional learning, that's taught in schools, like, that's not the business of a school to do social emotional learning. And also, they're not the smartest people in the world. So if you have, take Abigail Schreier's book, for example, we were just talking about, all these people who are trained in mental health, not very good at it. Now you have a whole bunch of people who are not even trained and who are not even smart, and they're doing it even less well. And so it's just, they're getting out a lot of their maternal
Yeah.
instincts.
And
There's not really
also,
men involved here.
right. And I want to say that one of the things that I'm like segueing into things as I think it's relevant. So one of the things that I don't remember who said it, that the way you know that a society is in trouble is when anti-Semitism flares up,
Hmm.
wherever it
Canary.
happens.
Yeah, it's a canary.
And and one of the things that we've been seeing is that the more crazy things have happened, I think, in America, the more we've been seeing people hating the Jews. So I
Hmm.
wonder what it is. First of all, why do you think on the left we've been seeing so much hate to Jews in general? So, like, every time he says, no, we're anti-Zionist, but then you go
Hmm.
find them protesting outside a Jewish deli somewhere
Right.
or outside a synagogue. That's not anti-Zionist. That's anti-Jewish. Or I remember one of the things that you wrote about, like right before the election in Chicago, a guy was stabbed, an Orthodox Jew,
Hmm.
and then the mayor and police chief refused to say that he was, first of all, they refused to call it for a long time a hate crime, and they refused to say that even though he said Allahu Akbar, that he said it, they refused to say that it was because he was Jewish. So first of all, why do you think it's happening? And second, why is there such a fear to admit that it's happening?
Yeah, I mean, the folks that I know that do this, and I have friends who have this issue, and opening their eyes a little bit to this, they see it as anti-Zionism. And a lot of it is ignorance. They don't understand that, like, when my husband prays 3 times a day, he's praying
To
not to the
Zion.
east. Yeah,
Right.
he's not praying to the east. Like, if he was in China, he wouldn't be facing east. He'd be facing west. He's facing Israel. And they don't understand, how basically every Jewish holiday is about Israel in some way or another. Um, my favorite factoid that I throw at people is that Hanukkah was about not assimilation, and we, as American Jews, celebrate it as assimilation, like the most assimilated holiday imaginable. Hanukkah pajamas
Yeah.
and like the Hanukkah gifts and like it's just so Christmasized. It drives me nuts. But um, but they don't understand that you cannot divorce the two. Zionism and Judaism are,
Right.
intertwined. Um, and irrevocably, if they would say. But they what is the name of Horn's book? Everyone Likes a Dead Jew. Is that what it is? Or
But I
whatever.
think everyone does love a dead Jew.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. They love Jews as like,
Weak.
Jerry Seinfeld and bagels on the Upper West Side. But God for and they like Anne Frank, this poor defenseless girl. But they don't like that as a result of thousands of years of people trying to kill us. We now have an army, and we now punch back, and we will bunker bomb like Hezbollah into oblivion and not be sorry about it. They don't like the Jew that fights back. And sorry, but not sorry.
Yeah. And also, so are you worried that um I guess that's on the left, but then on the right we've been seeing suddenly all these weirdos. I think like I remember I'll just throw out a few minutes. Candace Owens suddenly became Meshuggah. I was like a Jewish became a crazy person. Maybe she was always. And
He was always.
Tucker is like dabbling in
He was
with
always
speaking
also.
with this priest from Bethlehem who says that all the Jews are like killing the Palestinians, which is I lived next to Bethlehem for a long time in Efrat, and I could tell you I was in Bethlehem as a soldier. No one's killing people just willy nilly in
Mhm.
Bethlehem. The people who left ran away. The Christians ran away from Bethlehem because the Palestinian Authority basically made it unlivable for Christians. But my point is that it seems that there's a lot of people on the right that are advancing a narrative anti that's cold to Jews at best and anti-Semitic at worst.
Yeah, yeah, there absolutely are. I mean, when Carol and I wrote our book, we had the option of going on Candace's show, and we both said, not it. Not it. I don't want to do it. You can do it. No, you don't want to do it. And it was because we knew that she was an anti-Semitic lunatic, and we didn't want to sell more books if that meant having to talk to her for an hour and a half. Um, but and Tucker Carlson, the same thing. Like there was always hints of this. The difference, I mean, the similarity between the two of them is when they were let go from institutions, whether they be Fox or the Daily Wire, who tried to limit the liability that their views were. When they were let free of those bonds and could just say what was on their mind, this was what was on their mind. These conspiratorial, crazy things about Jews and about Jewish control of, I don't know. I mean, God, if we controlled everything,
I
like,
wish.
I wish, right?
Yeah.
But the funniest is that we control the media. I'm like, have you read the Washington Post? Have you read the New York Times? Um, but it, yeah, there was always this. I can tell you that with certainty. With insofar as Tucker and Candace, this always was an undercurrent with both of them. They were both
But are you
always.
worried? Are you worried that, for example, Trump is very? I saw him at the RNC. Tucker sat in the box next to Trump. So there's always like it seems to be a competing. Two parties are pushing in the Trump
Mhm.
orbit. There is the pro sane Israel, just sane people like his daughter and his
Yeah.
son-in-law and the people around him that he's appointed, Huckabee and
Right,
Rubio
but he's
now. And
appointed. That's the
right,
thing. He's
right,
appointed Rubio. He's appointed Huckabee. And his daughter and son-in-law are from Jews. They're
right.
Orthodox Jews. So and if you scroll through Ivanka's Twitter, which I weirdly did last night also, she doesn't tweet very often. Her October 7th tweet was pretty near the top and reflecting on what happened. And she went to Kfar Aza before I did. I was there on day 100. She was there a couple weeks before, and I was talking to the folks that walked her around. And it's not bull. for her and Jared. Like, it is a very sincerely held belief that, is not always convenient. I know of circumstances where, Jared had to talk to a rabbi about like how to handle Shabbos and working in the White House and all those things. And it's a very deeply held thing for them. They Ivanka went on Lex Friedman's podcast and had a very long form conversation, which is not something she does. Like, she doesn't speak very often. But that to me indicates like when she does speak, it really does speak volumes. And in the course of that interview, several times she would delve into notions of like lashon hara and other not surface level things about Judaism. Like, she's not a Reformed Jew who's talking about tikkun olam, who doesn't know what that means. She's really talking like she knows what she's talking about, and in a very cerebral way, talking about like the dangers of lashon hara and all of those things. And that is who is in his inner circle. It's the Huckabees, it's the Kushners, and it's the Rubios. And all of those three, for example, I mean, Jason Greenblatt's another wonderful example. I know all of these people personally, and they have a deeply held belief. And it's not tikkun olam, and it's not the Christian, version of it. It is sincere. So, I mean, I enjoy Tucker monologue just the same as anybody else. Sometimes he hits the right note, but he's also kind of an anti-Semitic lunatic, you know, but
Yeah.
broken clock is right twice a day.
Bethany, just before we finish, can we talk about your book? Could you give us, I mean, the name is, it makes you think, just, it perks up the interest. So what exactly, how are people being indoctrinated? We spoke about the schools, but maybe give us a little bit about other things and what really we can do about it. Well, in Israel, I'm not sure we can do about it because it's probably not really happening here. But how about in America? Maybe it is happening here, but in other ways. So maybe,
Slowlier.
yeah,
Slowlier, that's a word.
yes.
Slower. It's
But
happening slower,
also,
but I
I
think
think
it's
in Israel, before you answer, is that the difference is that in Israel, people are way more religious,
yeah,
just in general. And so that gives a lot more
it's a bulwark.
cover for a lot of the outside influences from coming in. And a lot of the ultra Orthodox here don't even have cell phones, or internet on their cell phones. So it's very difficult for
hmm
these things to come in. So maybe that is a little bit of the difference.
I mean, and also, I really think a lot of these issues would be made better if, I mean, in Israel, you have this like forced socialization in the army, in school, um, in university, on Shabbos. Like, all of these things you have to create a community. But I mean, stolen youth is, I think, the scariest chapter. So we broke down sort of all of the touch points of the American childhood and how they're being invaded by this ideology. And, there's the places that everyone knew, like schools, like entertainment. But the most surprising chapters that I've heard from people, it came out a year and a half ago, still as relevant as ever, though. I heard from people the most surprising chapters were the literature chapters, because it's happening in the publishing industry. And also in the medical field. I think that was the most scary.
What's
Um,
happening? Can you get just a little bit?
yeah, yeah. So Carol and I are very different parents, mothers. I had 6 children. She had 3. She sends her kids to school. They went to public school in New York City for a while. And I homeschool my 6 children. And my kids are more, I wouldn't say sheltered, but more sequestered than her children are. Um, Her kids have phones, mine don't, for example. But as much as I sequester my children in the medical field, that's something that is inescapable. And so I know that my pediatrician is going to try to have a private conversation with my daughter in the next year and a half, 2 years, about her sexual identity and all those things. And I'm going to have a conversation with my pediatrician about that. I know that that's coming. I've spoken to parents who have older children in my practice. That's a problem that I will face. But the scarier thing is, um, you know, every step of a doctor's career is invaded by this ideology. And so I spoke to medical students who, when they were applying for med school, had to answer essay questions that if you didn't answer the right way, you don't even get into medical school. And so the meritocracy is not there to begin with, because if you're a doctor who's brilliant, or a wannabe doctor who's brilliant, you don't get into medical school without at least faking an allegiance to this ideology. And then all through your training, DEI is mandatory, but there's things like anatomy sometimes that are not mandatory. And so the training in medical school is pushes this ideology very heavily.
What's the ideology? The ideology of like where like
Yeah.
gender identity and identity politics, that
And race. A lot of it is race.
that white people, white privilege, and
Yep.
all this kind of DEI stuff where we need to have quotas of certain things, and people need to be uplifted based on their race because there's like a race totem where some people are more oppressed, less oppressed, and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. So even in the medical field, so people are being accepted to medical school based on their race, and then once they're in, they're being,
but not just accepted to medical school based on, it's not just the admission, it's also if you have to answer essay questions about inclusion and equity and you know, all of those things.
So if you say, I just want to say, if you say on your essay that you're for people being for a colorblind society, let's say, where everybody is judged by the content of their character rather than the color of their skin. So I'm quoting someone very special. Then you would, in some places, would not be accepted into 100%. The school.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Martin Luther King wouldn't be accepted into the school.
Yeah.
Because he would be called a racist, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
So a lot of the questions are about like how will you advance equity and inclusion as a doctor? I don't. I just want to practice medicine.
Right.
That answer won't get you in.
Wow.
So there's that, and then there's also, you know, continuing training. If you go to a surgical conference, and this was a specific example in the book. There was a surgical conference where they were talking about the best standard of care for premature babies born, you know, 25 weeks gestation. There was an uproar at the conference because the panel was all white men. And so they decided that the panel was not diverse enough and they scrapped the panel. And so, you know, that's a field that evolves very rapidly. And the conference attendees did not hear about the best practices for that year. That was it. Everyone there was a year behind where they should have been. But then at every single subsequent medical conference, not just that one, they're looking to fill panels of experts, not based on their expertise and not based on their knowledge, but based on their identity. And that impacts care in ways that we'll never know.
Mm-hmm. And in literature, can you just, what did you mean by in literature that publishing houses are denying certain pieces because of the person who wrote them, his skin color maybe, or stuff like that?
Yeah, so there's two components in literature. There's one on the author front, where you know, they have literal quotas. I spoke to an editor who said, I have a quota system that's in place from my bosses, and I cannot publish a
race quota.
Man. Yes. Oh, and a gender quota too. If you're a white straight man, you cannot publish a children's book. Just doesn't happen. But then, you know, when they finish a book, they say, you know, we really need a theme, a DEI theme covered in here somewhat. Can you make the sister bisexual? And there's a very, very award-winning children's book that was published recently where the sister is just randomly bisexual. And it just appears once, and I've spoken to people who were involved in the process of that book. It was inserted very late in the editing process. It feels completely out of place, completely random, because they had to check that box.
Wow. So, but why is this happening? It's very weird because let's say I'm just to finish off our conversation. It's just shocking to me because it seems so obvious that, first of all, as a business decision for a lot of these people, it's stupid because, well, we saw in the last election that most Americans don't buy this stuff. but also, like, who would want to fly a plane for someone that they knew got into flying school based on their racial identity or sexual identity and stuff like that? Or who would want to buy a book that they knew the person who wrote the book was accepted by the publishing house, not because he wrote a great book, but because she it was a she, and because it was a person of color or something like to that effect? It's very weird, no?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, the answer on the libraries, for example, or I answered your question. The answer on the books is the libraries. So I am just one person. And so in our family, we're just going to buy one book. But for a library system, they will purchase dozens of books. So there is an incentive with public libraries and school libraries and teachers with these books. So institutionally, from the booksellers to the people who are writing the reviews, everywhere prioritizes and incentivizes this ideology in books. And so if you write an anti-racist board book for babies, it's not going to sell, and that's a book that exists. It's not going to sell many books outside of like gifts for people. But, my local library owns dozens of copies, and that's just one county in one state, and they own dozens of copies. And so it really incentivizes this ideology for publishing houses because it does sell. It does make them money. Um, on, when it comes to corporations, uh, there are metrics. Vivek Ramaswamy talks about this a lot, and so does Chris Rufo. They have ESG scores. They have
Yeah.
scores that make it more profitable for them to engage in this ideology. When we're talking about stocks and investors and shareholders and all of those things. And so those are things I don't really understand as much. But the bottom line is this ideology is incentivized across the board by people in positions of extreme power. And this was something, again, that Mark Anderson talked about with Joe Rogan on his podcast recently, that the the level of power that the left has in these institutions is terrifying. And it was funny, on election night, a lot of the exit polls indicated that a lot of Americans cared about the future of democracy. And I was watching CNN and MSN, and I was toggling between MSN, CNN, and Fox. And liberals got really excited by those exit polls because they're like, yes, everyone who cares about democracy and the future of the free Western world, we're going to do great. And it turned out that the majority of the people who said they were concerned about the future of democracy voted for President Trump.
Yes.
And so Mark Anderson, when he was speaking to Joe Rogan, it was a great episode. I recommend it. He was saying, I stepped out of a meeting with Biden administration people about how they were going to really amass control over the tech world. And Joe Rogan asked him, well, then what did you do? What do you do with that? He said, I walked out of that meeting and I endorsed Donald Trump for president. That's what you do.
Yeah, but most people don't have that power, which is why
And they
it's so
shouldn't.
dangerous. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Bethany, I want to say that are you optimistic after we had an election? We're optimistic. You said you're happy about the results. But on the other hand, all these institutions have so much power and they're so overtaken by this ideology. So, is there any way to really fight back except for like you homeschool your children? A lot of people probably don't have that option. Where is maybe they do, but my point is that that's
They
one
don't want
thing
to.
that you can do. But what else? Is there something that we can do systematically? Something that we can or are we stuck?
I mean, on an interpersonal level, people need to make some hard decisions. You need to prioritize having a baby and, having another baby and having another baby. To do that, you need to find the right partner. To find the right partner, you need to start going to church. You need to start going to shul, whatever it is. You need to surround yourself with the right environment that will enable you to have a rich and fulfilling life.
Yes.
And then, prioritize getting them in an education that that will give them the right values. And sometimes that's homeschool, sometimes it's private school. Sacrifices have to be made. Life isn't easy. No one, I mean, I was going to say no one said that it is, but actually a lot of people say that it is. And that's
Yes,
why there's so,
especially nowadays.
yes. But, sacrifices have to be made. Um, we're, we have 6 kids living in one of the most expensive metro areas in America, and, sacrifices have to be made. But that's the interpersonal answer, is that people need to make decisions that will result in a fulfilling and meaningful life. I do feel optimistic. I look at the appointments that President Trump has made so far, like Jay Bhattacharya at NIH. Like, that was a fantastic choice. Rubio, Huckabee, Stefanik, amazing. Like, all of these folks. And also, I really like Hegseth. I think that he's really going to really shake up the Department of Defense in a very necessary way. He's not a Fox, he's not just a Fox host.
Right.
He's actually like very qualified for this position. And, the number one criticism is that he hasn't been in the military recently. I'm like, yeah, because everyone has left. Like, everyone I know in the military. I live in Washington, D.C. Like, I have a lot of military friends, and everybody wants to get out. And there's some optimism for the first time I've ever heard since living here from these military friends about, like, well, maybe we won't all die.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we'll all be okay. So I do definitely feel a lot of optimism. I think that he has a mandate that he needs to use. Chris Rufo, God bless him, needs to just go whole hog. I mean, there's a lot of these incredible thinkers who have spent the last, 10 years, who are ready to be deployed. And they need to be,
Yeah.
whether it be in foreign policy or tech, whatever. What was really fascinating about watching the coalition that coalesced around Trump was that they're just brilliant. From Mark Anderson to Elon Musk to Pete Hegseth, like, all of these people who have expertise. Joe Rogan also, like, there are some of these people, Megyn Kelly, like, Rogan and Kelly. I first met Megyn Kelly when both of us were anti-Trump, and I went on her show. Like, that was the evolution. And so I watched it and I experienced it with her, and I voted for Trump and said so publicly also. Not as famous as Megyn Kelly, but this a lot of people came to the same realization that he was the best chance at saving the American democracy. And I hope that he, takes it.
Delivers.
Yeah.
Bethany Mandel, it was a pleasure talking to you, and hopefully, we ended off on a positive note. So hopefully everything will work out, and he will deliver on everything. There's a lot of expectations by his supporters, so he might. It's ripe for disappointment too. So we'll see. So thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning in to the Western Spirit podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode. See you next time.